How many of you know who Ermin is? Okay. A few of you. He's probably the best known skeptic in America today. He defines himself, he identifies himself as an agnostic leaning toward atheism. And he's a New Testament specialist. Very good Greek scholar. And Ermin says, it's really a cool line. He said, Paul spent 15 days with Peter and James, the brother of the Lord. He said, I'd like to spend 15 days with James and Peter. That'd be cool. And then Ermin says this, except for Paul, he says, where can you get any closer to eyewitness testimony than this? Okay, see the backdoor argument here? Bart's not going to let you get away with Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, but he will let you talk to him about Paul, and especially Paul's talk back here with Peter and James. He'll let you do that, because he knows who these guys are. They're eyewitnesses of Jesus, and except for Paul, eyewitnesses of a good chunk of his life, besides just the resurrection. Now, what do you think they talked about for 15 days? I think a lot of things, but if I were Paul, this would have been my first question. I'll tell you what Jesus looked like on the road to Damascus if you tell me what he looked like after the cross. You tell me one more important question than that. I'm sure Paul wanted to hear from their mouth what the resurrection was like for them. Because Paul says, I come to preach nothing but Christ and Him crucified. Paul speaks way more. If you talk about the historical Jesus, Paul talks way more about the death and resurrection of Jesus than probably all the rest of Jesus' life put together. And what's Galatians about? It's a short book. Well, what's the theme of Galatians? It's the gospel. Get it right. Don't add to it. Don't subtract from it. Don't blow it. This is God's word. You ready? All right. Learn it. Pass it out. That's Galatians. So how could he have been there for 15 days, majoring in the gospel, spending most of his time when he talks about Jesus, talking about the gospel message, and not have asked him about the gospel? Even Ermin says it's obvious they discussed the gospel data. All right, now watch this. This happens at +5 or +6. There's a Greek word in Galatians 1:18. That's a very valuable word, very good word. I'll tell you what, I'll put it over here. Well, the whole word, it's hysteresis. But here's the real word, and I'm transliterating it into English, right? Because these aren't Greek letters. There it is. But the form in which Paul uses it is hysteresis. It's the Greek word from which we get our word history. And this is what Paul uses to tell you what he was doing in Galatians 1:18. Oftentimes, English translations slaughter this term. It says things like, he saw Peter. A little better, he inquired of Peter. It's a little better. I know of 2 or 3 non-evangelical word studies. And here's the conclusion. It's not fair to say back in the 1st century that there's our word history, he would play the historian, that settles it. Because we don't know if the word's always meant the same. But in papyri, at that early date, histor is used, I guess today, the closest we would say. You probably see it on your television every night, depending on what area of the country you're from, at 10 or 11 o'clock. And it's called eyewitness news. Hysteresi means to check something out firsthand. Well, let's put this together. Paul comes to Jerusalem, +5 or +6. He's interviewing James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul. He's talking about, he's investigating something, he's interviewing them, and the whole book of Galatians is about the gospel. What do you think they're talking about? You know, Paul wanted to be a little bit pushy. Here's a pastoral, this is an informational footnote in my little lecture. If Paul were going to make a pastoral application, he might do this. With a group this size, there are a lot of people in this room, I dare say, many of us, maybe the majority, who have not been all that we could have been for the Lord, either before our salvation or after. And maybe some of us had some major slip-ups, and we're not proud of it. What if Paul started a conversation like this? Not to bug you guys, but I have a question. You guys know I was a persecutor. I thought I was doing God a favor to imprison and kill men, women, and even children for the name of Jehovah. And I was wrong. But with all due respect, you guys have some blood on your hands too. James, most of your life you did not believe your own brother. And if I remember the account correctly, when Jesus came to town, you and your brothers tried to lock him up. You thought he was nuts. That is the way the Greek reads in Mark 3. And Peter, he denied the Lord 3 times. And he went to the cross. I mean, you know, I'm just saying. If you had spoken up in his favor, who knows what would have happened? I'm sure Paul believes that was God's choice and that was decreed to be that way. But still, Peter denied the Lord. There's a message here that these 3 great founders of the church all came from very questionable pasts to revolutionize the world. That's a neat message. So they're all together here. Paul's interviewing them, presumably talking about the gospel. And then Galatians 2 starts. And Galatians 2 starts this way. Galatians 2:2 is one of the most incredible verses in the whole New Testament. Paul says, 14 years later I went back up to Jerusalem. Okay, 14 years. Critics put this at about 48 AD, or plus 18. And go back up to Jerusalem in 2:2. Galatians 2:2. I like the King James here, but translations are almost the same. Paul said, I went up there to see the pillars, the apostles. I set before them the gospel I was preaching to see if I was running or had run in vain. What? Yeah, about 48 AD, I set the gospel before them to make sure we were all on the same page. Paul, you waited 18 years to see if you and the boys were on the same page? I think Paul would say, you know, you're not really paying attention to my argument, are you? Jesus did it. He appeared to me. I saw the resurrected Jesus. Do you have a better witness? I didn't think so. All right. 3 years later, I spoke to Peter and James, the brother of Jesus. For 15 days, I went over this. I knew their testimony as well as mine. Better sources? I didn't think so. Okay, this is at least the 3rd time I've checked out the message. Jesus, Peter and James, and now I'm coming back again just to make sure we're staying on the same page. And this time, who's in Jerusalem? Now, Titus and Barnabas are there, and they're big names. I just came from a big conference this last week, and I've got to go to another one, Lord willing, in 3 weeks. Huge apologetic conference. There were 2,000 people there Saturday. You hear a bunch of speakers from all over. And they had plenary speakers and breakout sessions. And if, you know how it goes. The breakout sessions, 4, 5, 6, 10, go on at the same time. Well, Titus and Barnabas would have been breakout speakers. You know, today, if they were in Lynchburg, you would have come from all over to hear those 2 speak. But with the guys they were with, they were breakout speakers. Paul, plenary speaker. Peter, plenary speaker. James, the brother of Jesus, the pastor of the largest church in the ancient world, plenary speaker. And who else is there? John, the son of Zebedee. Folks, in terms of influence, or in terms of New Testament writing, you cannot name 4 more influential names than Paul, James the brother of Jesus, John, and Peter. 2 of the 12 and 2 other apostles, the brother of Jesus and the prophet of Edom, the persecutor whom God met personally. They're all here. Paul said, I set before them the gospel I was preaching to make sure we're all on the same page. And then just a few verses later, he adds 5 words in English. They added nothing to me. They added nothing to me. What's that mean? Even when I appeared before the big 3, they didn't presume to change my message. They knew we were on the same page. Then Galatians 2:9, they gave Barnabas and me the right hand of fellowship. That's where we get that phrase, the right hand of fellowship. Folks, you don't lay hands on somebody and say, you're one of us. You take the gospel to the Gentiles, Peter will take it to the Jews, as they say there, if you don't think they're legit in terms of their history and their theology. They laid hands on him and said, go get him. They added nothing to me. Great comment. All right, so this is an extension, because there's only one new guy there, John, but he's very important. The other 3 are all back here. Now watch closely. This is when Paul heard their message at +5 or +6. And remember, we want early eyewitness testimony. We're going to get all the way back to the cross. That's how good this testimony is. You say, well, how are you going to span this gap here? All right. This is when Paul heard their message. This is when Paul saw Jesus for himself. There's still a 2 to 3 year gap. There's a 5 to 6 year gap from here. But Paul heard their testimony here.